What if the place you ran to for escape, the one place you believed was truly real, was the most sophisticated lie ever told? What if the silence you craved, that deep, cathedral hush of an old-growth forest, was never truly silent? What if the grand, untamed majesty of the wild, the biting wind on a high peak, the infinite black of a moonless night was just a program, a beautifully rendered, impossibly complex fabrication, designed with one purpose: to give you the illusion of freedom while keeping you firmly and unknowingly within its cage? Think about that for a moment. Not as a fantasy, not as a line from a movie, but as a genuine possibility. That the very concept of natural is an artificial construct. Most of you who have found your way here to the Wilderness Protocol have done so for a reason. You didn't just stumble upon this channel by accident. You came looking. You came looking because you've felt it too, haven't you? That subtle wrongness at the very edge of your perception. That nagging, splinter in your mind feeling that the world isn't always playing by its own rules. You've been deep in the woods, miles from anyone, and heard a sound that didn't belong, too metallic, too rhythmic. You've been watching a sunset, and for a fraction of a second, the colors seemed to buffer, to lag. You've felt a presence in the vast, empty loneliness of nature, a chilling certainty that you were being observed, not by an animal, but by something administrative. You've tried to explain it away, a trick of the light, your mind playing games, fatigue. You've tried to rationalize it, to fit it into the neat, tidy box of the world you thought you knew. I'm here to tell you you can stop trying. You are not crazy, but the truth is infinitely more structured, more deliberate, and infinitely more terrifying than a simple ghost story or a local legend. Those are stories we tell ourselves to explain the glitches. The reality is the glitch itself. My name doesn't matter anymore. It belongs to a person who believed the world was solid, who believed the sky was real. I'm a ghost in the machine now, a voice in the static, a chronicler of the unraveling. And this is the story of how I went looking for solitude in the heart of the American wilderness, a place I loved more than any other. It's the story of how I went there to find myself, and instead found the edge of our shared reality. This is the story of the day I found the seam in the sky. So, I ask you to stay with me. Put away your distractions. Turn down the lights. What I have to show you, what I have to tell you, requires your full attention. It will change the way you look at the sky, the trees, and the very ground beneath your feet. Forever. What you thought was a sanctuary is about to become a schematic. Let's begin. It started, as these things often do, with a desperate need for silence. That's a phrase we use lightly, isn't it? I need some peace and quiet. We say it after a long day at work, or when the kids are yelling. For me, it had become something more. It was a physical craving, a deep cellular ache. My life had become a cage built of glowing rectangles. The soft, demanding glow of my phone in the morning before my feet even hit the floor. The relentless glare of the dual monitors at my desk for 9, sometimes 10 hours a day, a waterfall of emails and data that never ceased. The frantic, flickering blue light of the television at night, a desperate attempt to drown out the echoes of the day. The world wasn't a place of experiences anymore. It was a series of windows, and I was just clicking between them. The noise wasn't just auditory. It was a psychic static. The constant hum of the city, the distant wail of sirens, the muted thud of bass from a neighbor's apartment. It all bled together into a low, persistent frequency of anxiety. I felt my own thoughts being fragmented, my attention span shattered into a million tiny pieces. I was frayed, a wire stripped of its insulation, sparking at the slightest touch. The wilderness had always been my church, my confessional, my reset button, not the curated, family-friendly trails with their neatly painted signposts and gravel paths. Not the places where you're never truly out of cell phone range. I craved the true wild. The places on the map where the green of the national forest gives way to the beige of the unknown, marked only by faint contour lines and the forgotten names of long-dead prospectors. The places that don't care if you live or die. The places that demand your respect, and in return, offer a silence so profound it can swallow you whole. My destination was chosen after weeks of poring over topographical maps and satellite imagery. A remote, glacially carved basin deep in the Sierra Nevada. My research suggested it was a difficult and unrewarding trek for most, which made it perfect for me. The main trail fizzled out 10 miles from the nearest road, after which it was pure cross-country navigation. According to the ranger station's logbooks, which I had checked online, the area saw maybe a handful of hikers a year, mostly in late summer. I was going in the autumn, when the air turns sharp and the fair-weather crowd has long since retreated to their fireplaces. I was planning for total, absolute solitude. A full week of it. Preparation became my ritual, my meditation. I laid out every piece of gear on my living room floor, a sacred geometry of nylon and steel. My gear was meticulous, an extension of my own will to survive. A Hilleberg Sulo, a fortress of a tent capable of withstanding a gale. A feathered friend's sleeping bag, rated to sub-zero temperatures. A cocoon of downy warmth against the high-altitude cold. The MSR Guardian, a purifier I trusted to make the most stagnant puddle safe to drink. A powerful solar charger and a backup battery bank for my GPS and my Kamerami, only concessions to the digital world I was trying to escape. The irony was not lost on me. My food was a carefully calculated array of dehydrated meals, dense protein bars, and vacuum-sealed bags of nuts and jerky. Enough for 10 days, a 3-day buffer for emergencies. I was an experienced backpacker. I'd faced down a charging moose in Alaska. I'd been caught in a whiteout blizzard in the Rockies. I'd splinted a friend's broken ankle miles from help. I respected the wild, I knew its dangers, or at least I thought I did. I was prepared for bears, blizzards, and broken ankles. I wasn't prepared for the truth. The first 3 days were a lie. A beautiful, perfect, seductive lie. The moment my boots left the dirt of the trailhead parking lot and hit the pine needle path, I felt it. The noise of the city sloughing off me like a dead skin. The thin, sharp air was like a tonic, scouring my lungs clean. The sky, I don't have words for the blue of the sky at 10,000 feet. It wasn't just blue. It was a physical presence. A deep, crystalline, impossible dome that seemed to hum with its own silent energy. Everything was perfect, almost suspiciously so. On day 1, as I climbed above the tree line, I watched a golden eagle ride the thermals above a sheer granite cliff face. Its wings spread wide, a perfect silhouette against the perfect blue. It didn't just circle. It performed a ballet of effortless power. On day 2, I crested a ridge and walked into a meadow carpeted with the last of the season's wildflowers. A herd of mule deer, at least 20 of them, lifted their heads in unison. They weren't startled. They simply watched me with their wide, black, liquid eyes for a full minute before resuming their grazing, accepting my presence as if I were a natural part of the landscape. It felt like a scene from a nature documentary. Too perfect. On the evening of the 3rd day, I made camp beside a small alpine lake. The water was so still and so clear it was indistinguishable from the air itself. It was a perfect mirror, reflecting the jagged, snow-dusted peaks and the deepening sky with flawless fidelity. As the sun went down, I made a small, crackling fire, the wood catching easily, burning with a clean, smokeless flame. I ate my rehydrated chili mac, the simple, salty taste more satisfying than any gourmet meal. And then the stars came out. Not the faint, smudged stars of the suburbs. This was the full, unbridled glory of the cosmos. The Milky Way wasn't a faint cloud. It was a river of light, a thick, blazing belt of diamonds splashed across the velvet black. It felt ancient, primordial, felt utterly, completely real. That was the trick, you see. I understand that now. To make the illusion convincing, it has to be more perfect than reality itself. Reality is messy, it's flawed, it's random. The deer should have been more skittish. The fire should have sputtered and smoked. The lake should have had ripples, insects skimming its surface. But this was a curated perfection, a masterpiece of environmental design. I documented everything with my camera. It was a reflex, born of a life spent mediating experiences through a lens. I took hundreds of photos. The way the golden evening light filtered through the needles of the Jeffrey pines. The intricate fractal patterns of lichen on a granite boulder. The reflection of the stars in the mirrored lake. I was creating my own record of this perfect solitude. I didn't know then that I was actually gathering evidence. Evidence of the greatest deception ever conceived. The first incident happened on the fourth day. It was subtle. So subtle that my conscious mind dismissed it almost immediately, even as a deeper part of me recoiled. I had made my way into the heart of the basin and was setting up a new camp. I needed water, so I took my filter and my bladder down to a stream. It was a beautiful stream, exactly what you'd picture. A fast-moving, clear creek, maybe 10 feet wide, tumbling and gurgling over a bed of smooth, gray, rounded stones. I knelt on the bank, plunged the filter's intake hose into the freezing current, and began to pump. I listened to the rush and gurgle of the water. It's a sound I've known my whole life, a sound that has always brought me peace, the sound of moving water. But as I knelt there, my hand in the freezing current, feeling the powerful, chaotic push of the water against my fingers, I realized something was profoundly wrong. The sound, it wasn't quite right. It was a perfect recording of a rushing stream, but it was just theta recording. It had that slight, compressed, tinny quality of a high-fidelity sound effect. It was playing in a loop. I could feel it more than I could hear it. There was a large boulder in the middle of the stream, and the water crashed against it, sending up a white spray. But the sound didn't change. There was no corresponding crash or deeper roar in the audio. The sound was a constant, uniform shhhhhhh of rushing water, without the random variations, the peaks and valleys of pitch and volume, that a real stream would create. It was a static soundscape laid over a dynamic visual. I stopped pumping and pulled my hand out of the water. I stood up, cocking my head, listening intently. The sound was there, loud and clear, but the stream itself, it felt silent. I know how insane that sounds. How can you see water rushing and crashing and feel silence? It wasn't a silence in my ears, but a silence in my bones. A deep, profound sense of disconnect between what I was seeing and what I was hearing. It was like watching a movie with the wrong audio track dubbed over it. My brain scrambled for an explanation. My ears are ringing. The altitude. I'm dehydrated. Altitude sickness? I muttered to myself, the words sounding loud and foreign in the air. You're tired. You've been alone too long. I packed up my full water bladder and forced myself to turn away from the stream, to walk back to my campsite. I chalked it up to fatigue and the disorienting effects of isolation. It was an anomaly, a trick of the mind. That's what I told myself. But it was the first thread, a small, insignificant pull, and the entire tapestry of my world, of the world, was about to unravel. The moment that changed everything came that evening. On the fourth day, I was trying to forget the stream, trying to dismiss that unsettling audio glitch as a product of my own tired mind. I told myself I needed to reconnect with the beauty, to recenter myself in the perfection of the wild. I had made camp early, on a high, windswept ridge that overlooked the entire basin. It was a commanding view, a panorama of granite and pine that stretched for miles. The sun was beginning its descent, and I knew the light show was coming. So I did what I always do. I set up my camera on its tripod, wanting to capture the grandeur of it all, to prove to myself that the perfection was real. The sunset was spectacular, almost performative. The sky was on fire, a theatrical display of bleeding oranges, soft pinks, and deep, bruised violets that painted the undersides of the few wispy clouds. It was the kind of sunset that makes you feel small, that makes you feel a sense of profound spiritual awe. That was the intent, I suppose. As the blazing orb of the sun finally dipped below the jagged, black teeth of the western peaks, the light began to fade in that magical, transient way it does in the high country. The world softens, the sharp edges of the landscape blur, and for a few precious minutes, the peaks themselves seem to generate their own light. It's a phenomenon called alpenglow, a soft, rosy luminescence that kisses the highest points of the mountains. It's breathtaking. I was looking west, through my camera's viewfinder, making tiny adjustments to the focus, waiting for the perfect moment. And that's when I noticed it. High above the horizon, in the deep, flawless indigo of the upper atmosphere where the last light still clung, there was a line. It wasn't a contrail from a jet. I'm a photographer. I know what contrails look like. They are fuzzy, ephemeral. They catch the light and bloom, and the wind tears them into feathery wisps. This was different. This was a fine, sharp, and perfectly straight line. It was faint, almost subliminal, like a tiny scratch on a piece of old film. My first thought, of course, was my gear. A scratch on my lens filter. A stray hair inside the camera body. I pulled my eye away from the viewfinder and looked at the sky directly. The line was still there. In the sky. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs. I wiped my eyes. I blinked hard several times. The line remained. Unmoving. Unwavering. I quickly unclipped my binoculars from the strap on my backpack, my movements becoming hurried, clumsy. My hands felt cold, but the chill was coming from within. I raised the binoculars to my eyes, my breath fogging slightly in the cold, thin air. I fumbled with the focus dial, the magnificent panorama of the mountains blurring and then snapping into sharp relief. I angled the view upwards, finding the line, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. With the magnification of the binoculars, I could see it clearly. And what I saw made my carefully constructed reality crack like a sheet of thin ice. It wasn't just a line. It was a pattern, a faint, almost imperceptible cross-hatching of geometric light. It shimmered with a pale, sick, phosphorescent energy. It was a grid of infinitesimally fine lines, intersecting at perfect right angles. It was a mesh, rendered in faint shades of green and magenta, the kind of color aberration you see on a damaged digital screen. It looked like the wireframe of a 3D model. It looked like the universe had forgotten to apply its anti-aliasing. It looked digital. It looked like a tear, a rendering error in the final output. The place where two different textures in the skybox had failed to blend seamlessly. It was a seam in the very fabric of the sky. I stood there, frozen, binoculars pressed so hard against my eye sockets that it hurt, my knuckles white. My breath was gone, trapped in my lungs. I was trembling, a violent, uncontrollable shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was a primal, gut-wrenching fear. The kind of fear that bypasses reason and logic and plugs directly into the oldest part of your brain, the part that screams wrong, wrong, wrong. My mind was a whirlwind of frantic denial, an atmospheric phenomenon, a rare type of aurora. Ice crystals in the stratosphere forming an unnaturally perfect lattice. It was desperately, pathetically trying to find a file folder, any file folder, to put this impossible data into. But my gut knew better. The part of me that had felt the wrongness in the stream's audio loop knew exactly what this was. This was a glimpse behind the curtain. This was the stagehand peeking out from the wings. My training, my instinct as a photographer took over. It was the only thing I could do. Document it. With hands that shook so badly I could barely operate the buttons, I aimed my telephoto lens at the seam. I prayed not to God, but to the sensor in my camera, praying that it could see what I was seeing. I bracketed exposures, fired off shot after shot, frantically zooming in as far as the lens would go. The shutter's click was a tiny, insignificant sound against the vast, horrifying silence of this revelation. On the camera's LCD screen, the image was small, but it was there. The faint, undeniable geometry against the deepening blue. Proof. As the very last light of the sun vanished from the world, and the sky deepened to a star-dusted black, the seam began to fade. It didn't disappear instantly. It slowly dissolved, pixel by pixel, back into the background, like the ghost image on a phosphor screen finally turning off, leaving behind a perfect, seamless, star-filled night sky. I lowered my camera. I couldn't feel my fingers. I was alone, miles from any other human being, on a high, lonely ridge, under a canopy of what I now knew were just points of light in a program. And I had just seen something that told me my entire conception of the world of life, of reality itself, was a monumental lie. The wilderness no longer felt like a sanctuary, felt like a stage. And the beautiful sunset I had just witnessed felt like a cheap, digital theatrical trick. I barely slept that night. Every gust of wind against my tent sounded like a whisper just outside my hearing. Every snap of a distant twig sounded like a deliberate footstep. The profound silence I had craved now felt like the sterile silence of an empty server room, the silence of a place that was offline, waiting. The simulation knew I had seen it. I was sure of it, and it was watching me. The next morning, I woke with a singular, desperate prayer on my lips. Let it have been a dream. Let it have been a hallucination, a mirage brought on by altitude, exhaustion, and isolation, a trick of my own mind. I scrambled out of my tent, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and hope. I looked up. The sky was a vault of pure, crystalline, seamless blue. There was no trace of the grid, no scar, no shimmering tear in the fabric of the world. For one beautiful, intoxicating moment, relief washed over me in a tidal wave. It was so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I laughed, a raw, shaky, slightly unhinged sound that was swallowed by the morning quiet. It was just a trick of the light, a moment of psychosis, my tired brain playing games on me. I was okay. The world was okay. But the relief was a phantom. It was short-lived, because the world that greeted me that morning was not the same one I had fallen asleep in. The wrongness I'd felt at the stream, that subtle disconnect, was back. But it wasn't subtle anymore. It was amplified, multiplied. It was everywhere. I know now that the simulation has protocols. As long as the observer believes, the rendering can be lazy. But once an observer has been flagged as aware, once you've seen the code, the system either has to work harder to conceal itself, or it starts to break down under the scrutiny. Or perhaps it no longer feels the need to hide. The glitches began in earnest. I was breaking down my camp, methodically rolling my sleeping bag, when I saw her, a deer, a young doe, standing at the edge of the clearing, not 30 yards away. She was beautiful, her autumn coat thick and healthy, her ears perked, her eyes wide and black, but she wasn't moving. I don't mean she was standing still the way a living creature does, with the tiny, involuntary twitches of muscle, the rise and fall of its breath. She was frozen, utterly, unnaturally frozen. A gust of wind rustled the pines around her, sending a shower of needles to the ground. Her fur did not move. It was a static image. A fly buzzed lazily near her ear. She didn't even twitch an eyelid. It was like a high-quality, perfectly rendered 3D model that had been placed in the scene its animation cycle paused. I stood up slowly, watching her, mesmerized. For a full 5 minutes, I stared. The world moved around her, the wind, the insects, the shifting light, but she was a statue of a deer, her head cocked at an angle that seemed pre-programmed. A default pose. My scientific mind, what was left of it, took over. I needed to test the input. I clapped my hands. A sharp, loud crack in the mountain air. Nothing. I shouted, "Hey!" My voice felt thin and useless. Nothing. She just stood there, a perfect, lifeless sculpture. Then, as if an invisible switch was flipped, she blinked. Her tail flickered once. She took a breath that visibly expanded her chest, and then she bounded off into the woods, her movements fluid and entirely natural. As if nothing had happened. The animation cycle had resumed. A few hours later, I was hiking down from the ridge, trying to process what I had seen with the deer. I stopped to rest, leaning my weight against a massive, ancient-looking pine tree. I ran my hand over its bark, an old habit. The texture felt wrong. It felt slick and oddly uniform beneath my fingertips. I looked closer. From a distance of 10 feet, it had looked like normal, rugged bark, full of deep fissures and complex patterns. But up close, the details were muddy, blurry. It was exactly like a low-resolution texture in a video game that you're not supposed to be able to inspect too closely. I could see repeating patterns in the cracks and fissures, the same small, square section of texture tiled over and over again, faded and stretched across the curve of the trunk. It lacked the infinite, random, chaotic complexity of a real, living thing. It was a cheap, memory-saving shortcut. A wave of vertigo and nausea washed over me. This tree had stood here for centuries, a silent witness to the seasons. But it was a lie. It was an asset. I pushed myself away from it as if its phoniness were a contagion. The world was becoming a checklist of inconsistencies. The system around me was starting to fray at the seams. I saw a bird, a vibrant blue Steller's jay, flying across a clearing, but it stuttered mid-flight, freezing in the air for a fraction of a second before jumping forward 5 feet on its trajectory, like a skipping video file suffering from packet loss. The path I was following, a faint animal trail, began to loop. I passed a very distinctively shaped dead branch on the ground. It looked like a crooked fork. I noted it as I stepped over it. I hiked for what felt like another 20 minutes, my boots crunching on the trail, my body moving forward. I rounded a bend, and there it was again. The exact same forked branch in the exact same position with the exact same lighting hitting it. I stopped dead. I checked my GPS. It showed I had moved. My coordinates had changed. I was half a mile from my previous position. But the asset, the dead branch, had been rendered again in my path. But the most disorienting glitch, the one that truly shattered my sanity, was the temporal one. The sun. I am meticulous about time in the backcountry. It's a survival skill. I was hiking through a dense section of forest, the light dappling through the thick canopy above. Before entering the trees, I had checked my watch. 2:15 p.m. The sun was high and to my left. I walked for what felt like no more than 10 minutes a short, dark stretch of woods. When I emerged from the trees into a wide, grassy meadow, I was instantly struck by how different the light was. The sun was hanging low in the west, casting long, dramatic, evening shadows across the grass. The air was cooler. It was late afternoon. Impossible. I frantically pulled up the sleeve of my jacket and looked at my watch. The digital display read 5:30 p.m. 3 hours and 15 minutes had vanished. Just gone. There was no memory lapse, no feeling of having dozed off while walking. One moment it was 2:15. The next it was 5:30. It was a clean edit. A jump cut in the film of my life. I had been deleted from that period of time, and my consciousness had been pasted back in 3 hours down the line. Paranoia, cold and absolute, finally consumed me. Every sound, every sight was now suspect. Was that wind I felt on my face real, or was it a haptic effect? Was that hawk circling high overhead a living creature, or was it a scripted event designed to make the sky look interesting? I started talking to myself, whispering constantly, a desperate anchor to my own consciousness. The wilderness was no longer a place of beauty. It was a prison of pixels and code, and I was a bug in the system. The fear was a constant, metallic taste in the back of my mouth. I wasn't scared of bears or mountain lions anymore. I was scared of the programmers. I was scared of the system administrators. And I was terrified of what happens when they decide to run a diagnostic and fix the bug. I had to get out. That was the only thought left in my head. The 7-day trek into peaceful solitude was a forgotten luxury, a joke from a previous lifetime. My only goal now was to get back to the trailhead, back to my car, back to, well, I didn't know what I was getting back to anymore, but I knew I had to get out of this zone. I was moving with a desperate urgency, fueled by a constant, gnawing fear and shots of adrenaline. The glitches didn't stop. If anything, they became more frequent, more brazen, as if the system was becoming unstable under the strain of my awareness. Or maybe it was simply getting lazy, no longer bothering to hide its flaws from a user who already knew the secret. I passed a stream that flowed with no sound at all, a completely silent rush of water that was somehow more disturbing than the looped audio from before. I saw a sheer rock face ahead of me shimmer for a moment, its texture visibly sharpening and correcting itself as I approached, the level of detail popping in, just a fraction of a second too late. I walked through a small meadow where every single wildflower was a perfect, pixel-for-pixel copy of the one next to it. Hundreds of them, all identical, down to the last petal and the single, perfectly placed dewdrop on each one. An army of cloned assets. But I ignored them. I pushed them from my mind. I just hiked, head down, following my compass, trying to make my body outrace my spiraling thoughts. The 6th day, the day it all changed. I was scrambling down a steep, treacherous slope of scree field of loose, broken rock. It was a shortcut. I was being reckless, trading safety for speed. And the simulation, or maybe just gravity, made me pay for it. My foot slipped on a loose stone. My ankle twisted. I went down hard. I wasn't falling so much as sliding, tumbling down the sharp, grinding slope, the rocks scraping at my clothes and my pack. I threw out my hands, desperately trying to slow myself, my palms scraping against the sharp edges of the shale. I finally came to a jarring halt against a small outcrop of solid rock. For a moment, I just lay there, face down in the dirt and gravel, my cheek pressed against the cold stone. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I did a quick mental inventory. Ankle hurt, but wasn't broken. Knees were scraped. My hands were raw and bleeding, but I was alive. I was in one piece. Shaken, I pushed myself up into a sitting position. And that's when my hand, the one I had used to stop my slide, brushed against something buried in the loose dirt. It wasn't a rock. Rocks are gritty, dusty. They can be sharp, but it's an organic sharpness. This was different. This was cold. It was perfectly, unnaturally smooth. My curiosity overpowered my fear for a moment. I dug it out of the soil. It was a shard, a sliver of dark, completely non-reflective material, about the size of my palm. It seemed to drink the light. It was impossibly thin, no thicker than a credit card, and the edges were perfectly machined, sharp enough to cut. It wasn't metal, not like any I'd ever seen. It wasn't plastic. It had no rivets, no seams, no branding. It was a solid, seamless piece of some unknown material. It felt manufactured on a level I couldn't comprehend. A piece of something that had broken off. But that wasn't the shocking part. That wasn't the part that made my breath catch in my throat. Etched onto its dark surface, so fine that it was almost invisible to the naked eye, was text. Lines of it. A string of clean, clinical alphanumeric code. My hands were trembling so violently now I could barely hold it still. The world around me seemed to fade away. The mountains, the sky, the pain in my hands, it all vanished. There was only this object. This impossible object. I fumbled in my pack for my camera. It was the only thing I could think to do. Document it. I switched the camera on, turned the dial to its macro function, and used the bright LCD screen as a magnifier, holding the shard just inches from the lens. The autofocus struggled for a second, then snapped into place. And there, under the harsh, indifferent light of the mountain sun, I read the patch notes for my reality. It wasn't a language I understood, not fluently, but the syntax is universal to anyone who has ever looked at a line of code. There were headers, commands, and developer comments. / world 734 v.8.1.2 / recalibrate _skybox picture filtering aniso _16x / fix avian _ pathing exception ref j _setter / fix geological texture streaming / known issue repeating audio engine loop stream ambience 04b / deprecate old growth 47b / flag for replacement. I read it again and again. A wave of cold dread washed through me, so intense it felt like drowning. It was a litany of my entire experience. Skybox texture filtering. The seam in the sky. They knew about it. They were trying to patch it. Avian I pathing. The stuttering bird. A bug in its code. A null pointer exception. Texture streaming. The low-resolution tree bark. The cloned flowers. Repeating audio engine loop. The sound of the stream. My first sign that something was wrong. A known issue. This was it. The smoking gun. Undeniable physical proof. A developer's note. A piece of a debug tool. Dropped carelessly into the environment during maintenance. This shard felt heavy in my hand. Heavy with the weight of an impossible, world-shattering truth. My paranoia wasn't paranoia. It was an accurate assessment of my situation. I carefully, reverently, wrapped the shard in a clean cloth from my first aid kit and buried it deep in the central compartment of my pack. This was my evidence. This was the thing I would show the world. This was my truth. But as I stood up, the shard safely stowed away, a new feeling washed over me, colder and more dreadful than any fear I had felt before. The primal, animal instinct that tells you when you're being hunted. The feeling of being watched. I looked up from the ground, scanning the surrounding landscape, and my blood froze. On the ridge opposite me, maybe a half-mile away, silhouetted against the bright blue sky, stood a figure. It was too far away to make out details, but it was tall. Taller than any human should be, and thin, unnaturally, impossibly thin, like a line drawn by a pen. It was perfectly still, just like the deer had been. An observer, an admin. It knew. It knew I had found the shard. It knew that I knew. The game had just changed. I was no longer an observer of the glitches. I was an anomaly. I was no longer a bug to be patched. I was a threat to be contained. There is no thought in a moment like that. No logic. No reasoning. The conscious mind just shuts down. All that's left is the animal. The part of the brain that knows only two things: predator and prey. And in that instant, staring at the impossible silhouette on the ridge, I knew without a single shred of doubt which one I was. Panic, raw and undiluted, seized me. It wasn't a decision. It was an explosion of pure instinct. I ran. I didn't even bother looking for a path. I just launched myself down the rest of the scree slope, half falling, half sliding, my boots digging for purchase in the loose rock. I crashed through a tangle of thorny underbrush, ignoring the branches that whipped at my face and tore at my clothes. I had to get away. I had to break line of sight. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure on the ridge remained motionless, an unblinking observer. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that I was being pursued. Not in a physical sense, not yet. I was being tracked by the system itself. The all-seeing eye of the program had locked onto me, and the program was now fighting back. The sky, which had been a perfect, cloudless blue, began to darken. But it wasn't a natural change. Dark clouds, a deep, bruised purple-gray, boiled up from the western horizon with the speed of a freight train. Within 60 seconds, the sun was gone, blotted out. The temperature plummeted. The world was plunged into a surreal midday twilight. The wind began to howl, but it was like the stream was the wrong sound. It was a uniform, looped sound effect of a gale force wind, a digital roar that didn't gust or change direction. It was a sound file on repeat, and it didn't seem to make the trees move correctly. The smaller pines swayed violently, but the massive, older trees were almost static, their needles barely trembling. It was a sloppy, hastily rendered environmental effect. A storm was being generated, a set piece, a procedurally generated obstacle designed to stop me, to contain me. Rain began to fall. Not a drizzle, but thick, cold, heavy drops that splattered against the ground. Then, the sound changed to a hard, frantic ticking. Hail. Small, perfectly spherical pellets of ice began to hammer down. But when they hit my jacket, they didn't melt. They felt dry and strangely light, like styrofoam. I looked at the ground. The hail wasn't accumulating properly. It would hit the dirt and then just vanish. It was a visual and auditory effect, but the cold and the wind that came with it were very, very real. The simulation could manipulate the sensory data I was receiving, could make me feel the cold, even if the snow wasn't real. My technology, my connection to the outside world, died. I pulled out my GPS. The screen flickered, displaying corrupted map data, strings of random characters, and jagged, broken lines. The battery indicator still read 80%, but it was useless. Connection to satellite network lost. I knew it wasn't about satellites. The local grid was blocking me. I pulled out my physical compass, my last reliable tool. The needle, which should have pointed resolutely north, was spinning wildly, unmoored from the planet's magnetic field. They had rewritten the laws of physics in my immediate area. I was being cut off, isolated. They were rewriting the rules of the world around me to trap me inside this corrupted game level. For 2 days, I stumbled through this artificial storm. Or maybe it was 3. Time had lost its meaning again. I was lost, cold, hungry, and consumed by a paranoia so profound it was a physical presence. The landscape itself seemed to shift and reset when I wasn't looking. I would struggle for an hour to climb a steep, wooded hill, my lungs burning, only to emerge at the top and find myself looking down into the exact same valley I thought I had just left. The world was a labyrinth, and its digital walls were constantly moving. And during this time I saw them again. The observers, the admins. Sometimes it would just be a flicker at the edge of my vision as I ran. A tall, thin shadow that would vanish the moment I turned to face it. A data ghost in my peripheral processing. Other times it was more direct. I was huddled under a rock overhang during a lull in the fake blizzard, trying to eat a protein bar with frozen, trembling fingers. I heard a sound, or rather the absence of one. The constant, looped howl of the wind suddenly cut out, plunging the world into an unnerving silence. And in that silence, I heard a low electronic hum. I peered out from my hiding place, hovering silently over the valley below me. Moving in a slow, coordinated search pattern were 3 black helicopters. They were completely unmarked, sleek, and brutally geometric in their design, all sharp angles and non-reflective surfaces. And they made no sound, no chop-chop-chop of rotor blades, no whine of a turbine engine. They moved with a silent, fluid, impossible grace that was utterly terrifying. They weren't flying. They were being moved, like a game asset being dragged by a mouse cursor. They were the system's antivirus program. The cleanup crew, sent to find and quarantine a rogue element. Sent to find me. I knew with a chilling, absolute certainty that if they found me, I wouldn't be escorted out of the wilderness. There would be no trial, no questions. I would be deleted, my file dragged to the recycle bin. User Alex has been removed from the server. I shrank back into the shadows, making myself as small as possible, my heart hammering against my ribs. I knew the shard in my pack was a beacon, a unique piece of data they were scanning for. My only hope was that the simulation wasn't perfect. It had bugs, it had lag, and maybe, just maybe, its search algorithms weren't as efficient as they should be. I was a tiny error in a massive continental-scale program. I prayed I could slip through the cracks. I waited until the silent helicopters moved on, their search grid passing over my location. Then I ran again. On the morning of what I think was the 8th day, the storm broke. It happened as suddenly and as unnaturally as it had begun. One moment, the wind was howling and the styrofoam snow was falling. The next, silence. The clouds didn't drift away. They dissolved, pixelating at the edges and then vanishing in an instant. The wind stopped. The sun appeared in a sky that was once again a perfect, indifferent, pristine blue. The hunt was over. Either they had lost me, or the system had simply allocated its resources elsewhere. The high-level alert was cancelled. Exhausted, I staggered to my feet, and there, in the clear morning light, I saw a landmark I recognized. A winding river with a distinctive granite cliff on its far bank. A river I had crossed on my way in. With a renewed, frantic surge of hope, I followed it downstream. 2 days later, emaciated, covered in scratches, my clothes torn, and half-mad from fear and sleep deprivation, I stumbled out of the woods and saw it. The dirt road, the trailhead parking lot, and my car, sitting there exactly as I had left it. An island of sanity in a world gone mad. I have never felt a wave of relief so powerful. It was a physical thing. It buckled my knees. I sobbed, collapsing onto the ground, pressing my cheek against the solid, man-made dirt road. It felt more real than anything I had touched in a week. I had made it. I had escaped the cage. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I got in the car. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, a beautiful, dirty, mechanical, real sound. I didn't look back. I put the car in drive and hit the gas, sending gravel flying. I just drove, leaving the horrifying, beautiful, simulated wilderness behind me for good. Or so I thought. The drive back to civilization was a blur. A long, straight ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desert, taking me further and further away from the nightmare. With every mile I put between myself and that corrupted server they called a wilderness, I felt the tension in my shoulders begin to ease. I was still shaking, still running on the fumes of adrenaline, but I was out. That was the thought I clung to. I am out. I am safe. I stopped at the first sign of life I came across. A grimy, sun-bleached gas station on the edge of nowhere. It was a perfect icon of messy reality. The concrete was stained with oil. The paint on the building was peeling. A bin was overflowing with trash. It was ugly and flawed and the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I filled my tank, my hands still unsteady as I held the pump. I went inside. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. I bought a cup of that coffee, and it was burnt and bitter, and I drank it like it was the nectar of the gods. The cashier, a tired-looking woman with a faded tattoo on her arm, gave me a strange, long look. I knew what she saw. Wild eyes, face gaunt and scratched, clothes torn. The look of a man who had seen a ghost. If only it were that simple. As I drove on, re-entering the world of power lines and billboards, of asphalt and strip malls, I watched it all with new eyes. I had never been so happy to be in a traffic jam. The chaotic, messy, imperfect nature of human civilization felt like a comforting blanket after the sterile, curated perfection of the simulation I just left. This was real. This had to be real. I thought I was safe. I thought I had returned to the base reality. I was wrong. The first sign came as I entered the suburbs of a small city a few hours later. It was so subtle, I almost missed it. My new, heightened sensitivity, my paranoia, was the only reason I caught it. I was stopped at a red light, idly watching the mundane theater of everyday life on the sidewalk. A mother jogging with a stroller. 2 teenagers on skateboards. A man walking a golden retriever. And then I saw it. The man with the dog. He was a middle-aged man in a polo shirt. He was stuck in a loop. He would walk 3 paces forward on the sidewalk. The dog would stop and sniff a red fire hydrant. The man would give a gentle tug on the leash. And then he would glitch. His entire model man and dog would snap back 3 paces to his original position, and he would perform the exact same action again. Walk 3 paces, dog sniffs hydrant, man tugs leash. Over and over. A tiny 3-second animation loop playing out on the edge of my vision. I stared, my coffee forgotten in my hand, my blood turning to slush in my veins. No one else seemed to notice. The cars next to me waited patiently for the light. The jogging mother passed by the looping man without a second glance. Their perception filters were still working perfectly. Mine were shot. My heart began to hammer against my ribs again. That familiar rhythm of terror. Can't be. The light turned green. I drove, my eyes darting everywhere, frantically scanning, looking for more proof, praying I wouldn't find it. I looked at the brick wall of a bank I was passing. A big, solid, respectable-looking building. And I saw it. The same low-resolution texture I had seen on the pine tree. From a distance, it was fine. But as I got closer, I could see it clearly. The pattern of the bricks, the specific arrangement of color and wear on 4 or 5 of them, was subtly repeating. A tiled image, stretched over the surface of the building's 3D model. A developer's shortcut. My breath hitched. I risked a glance upward. I looked up at the sky. The afternoon sun was bright, blinding. But if I squinted, If I looked at the razor-sharp boundary where the edge of a rooftop met the pure blue of the sky, I could almost see it. Not a seam, not like before, but a faint, faint shimmer, a flicker, the almost imperceptible vibration of the pixel grid. The horrifying, soul-crushing, absolute realization crashed down on me. And this time, there was no escape. The wilderness wasn't the simulation. It was just a simulation, a server, a specific zone with its own unique assets, its own environmental protocols, its own set of bugs. And the city, it was just another zone, another more complex, more densely populated server. The entire world, all of it, the cities, the oceans, the vast plains, the sky above, the ground below, the people. Oh God, the people. Are they players like me? Or are they NPCs running on a script like the man with the dog? It's all part of the same impossibly vast simulation. There is no escape. There is no real world to get back to. We are all inside the cage. We were born in it. We live in it. We will die in it. The only difference between me and every other driver on that highway was that I now knew. I had seen the code. I had touched the architecture of our prison. And that knowledge was a new kind of wilderness. A loneliness so profound, so absolute, it made me nostalgic for the simple fear I had felt on that mountain ridge. To be the only one who knows the walls are there. Who built it? Why? Are we an experiment? A hyper-realistic video game for some entity we can't comprehend? A digital prison for consciousness? A historical reenactment? An ancestor simulation? I don't have those answers. All I have is a strange, dark shard of impossible material locked away in a safe, and the knowledge that haunts my every waking moment. I see the glitches everywhere now that I know how to look. A flickering texture on the pavement. A person whose speech momentarily skips like a scratched CD. The sound of rain on my window that doesn't quite match the number of drops I can see. The way shadows sometimes fail to render correctly under a street lamp. Most people don't notice. Their brains are conditioned to smooth over the inconsistencies, to autocorrect the errors in the data feed, to believe in the beautiful lie. But I can't unsee it. I can never unsee it. I am awake inside the dream, and I am utterly, completely alone. So, that is my story. That is what happened to me in the Sierra Nevada. And that is what has happened to me every day since. I live in a world I know is a fabrication, armed with a truth that I can't share with anyone in my life, lest they think I've gone completely insane. But I don't believe I am insane, and I don't believe I am alone. That is why I started this channel. The Wilderness Protocol. The name has a dual meaning for me now. It's a reference to where I found the first proof in that counterfeit wilderness. But it's also a reference to the new wilderness I now inhabit. The profound isolation of knowing the truth. And this channel is my protocol. My procedure for dealing with it. My attempt to send a signal out into the static. This isn't just a place for me to tell spooky stories to get views. This is a repository, a database, a place to document the glitches, the inconsistencies, the seams in the world. This is a place to collect the evidence that the programmers, the administrators, have failed to scrub. I can't be the only one. The system is too vast, too complex. They can't patch all the holes. I know with every fiber of my being that there are others out there who have seen things. People who have felt that same deep cellular wrongness. People who have paused a conversation because their friend's face flickered for a microsecond. People who have looked up at the sky and seen the tear in the fabric. People who have found their own version of my shard. I'm telling my story as a warning and as an invitation. A warning to be careful what you go looking for in the quiet places of the world. You might find more than you bargained for. The system seems to be at its most vulnerable, its rendering at its laziest, where there are fewer observers. Be careful of the silence. And this is my invitation to you. Pay attention. That's the protocol. Don't dismiss that strange feeling. Don't let your brain autocorrect the errors anymore. When you see something that doesn't add up, don't explain it away. Interrogate it. Stare at it. Your focus, your attention is like a magnifying glass on the code, and sometimes it can force the system to show its flaws. Document them. Film them if you can. Write down the time, the date, the location. Be a scientist of your own prison. The shard I found tells me they are constantly patching and updating this reality. V.8.1.2. This means the system is not static, is not perfect, is flawed, and it requires constant maintenance. And where there are flaws, there is potential. I don't know for what yet. A potential for understanding, for communication, or maybe, just maybe, a potential for escape. I don't know, but it's something. It's the only hope I have. Thank you for listening to my testimony, to my protocol. If you have seen something, if the story resonates with a strange event in your own life, if you have your own story of a glitch in the matrix, a seam in the sky, then I want you to share it. Use the comments section below. Be as detailed as you can. Let's compare notes. Let's see how deep this simulation goes. Let's build the database together. Subscribe to the Wilderness Protocol. Join this support group, because in a world that is not what it seems, the only thing we have is each other, and the shared knowledge that we are not alone in what we've seen. Stay vigilant, stay aware, and watch the sky.